Uh, Good evening. My name is John LaFurla, and I have the great pleasure of welcoming you here this evening to this Brody Center Forum. This is going to be a tremendously educational event for me, and I'm sure for you as well. And I'm going to speak only for a minute because my job is to introduce the moderator, who then will introduce the speakers. But I get the pleasure by virtue of the fact that I am both a member of the League of Women Voters. Yes, as a man, men can be members of League of Women Voters. Yay! And I'm also a member of Common Cause. So I was nominated to give the welcome. This way it avoids who goes first problem. So I want to just say that the Common Cause, many of you know, started roughly 40 years ago. It's a national organization that has about 400,000 members across the United States. And Common Cause of Maryland is looking for more members. So please get some information about it or go online and think about becoming a member of Common Cause. They advocate for good government. They're a nonpartisan organization, as I'm sure you know. We're also sponsored tonight by the National Council of Jewish Women, the Annapolis section, and I want to recognize them. And also, of course, the League of Women Voters, which started in 1920, so it's been around a long time since suffrage, since the women got to vote. And this is an organization that in which men and women together can work toward nonpartisan civic engagement. And there is information and membership forms for you to fill out and send in your check, of course. No, it's a great group. I also want to recognize Maryland Reporter, which is the media sponsor for tonight's event. So if anybody's here from Maryland Reporter, here he is, right here. Thank you very much. The Norman and Florence Brody Family Foundation provided the seed for these series of social science events. And this started nearly 20 years ago. And it gives me great pleasure to introduce our moderator this evening, Doug
Besharov, that's okay.
Besharov, thank you, who is a professor at the School of Social Policy. He does research on program evaluation and anti-poverty programs. And Doug has been the moderator, believe it or not, of all of the Brody Forum events going back nearly 20 years. So without further ado, I give you Doug Besharov.
John, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to welcome you here on behalf of the University of Maryland School of Public Policy. This is our business school. Has a slightly nicer ambiance, but we're attached right around the edge there. Some of you have been here. Hold it up. Is that a little better? Okay, good. And also, I want to welcome you on behalf of the Norman and Florence Brody Foundation. Well, redistricting, sometimes called gerrymandering, because an early example of a results-driven district was drawn to look like a salamander. And the person who designed it was a guy named Elbridge Gerry. And vice president. Yeah. And so it is not surprising that this has a long and venerable history of politicians choosing their voters instead of the voters choosing their politician.
But I am so happy that so many citizens are involved and concerned about their basic fundamental constitutional rights. You know, it's one thing to exercise the right to vote. It's another thing to proactively defend your democracy. And I think that's what you're doing here tonight, is defending your democracy and understanding that it's not just about voting, but it's also being a part of the process that develops who you can vote for and who the citizens of the state will be voting for and what communities get to stay together and what interests get to stay together. So redistricting is a very important issue. Common Cause, League of Women Voters, and other organizations have been working on this throughout the years, and I'm happy to join in the fight and in the struggle. Want to talk a little bit about the redistricting effort or the redistricting process in Maryland. So why do we redistrict? To ensure that every person's vote is worth the same as another. and to assure equal opportunity to elect representatives of individuals' choices. With the congressional redistricting, we ended up going into a special session in, I think it was October, to redraw the congressional lines. It required us to pass a bill. So the House and the Senate had to vote on a bill, and the governor proposed a plan for the congressional maps that were not accepted by all, but by most, obviously the majority. And so those passed in a special session. And unfortunately, what that did for our state is it left us in a horrible predicament where we had some of the most gerrymandered districts in the country. And in fact, I'll read you a statement from a case that was filed against the state of Maryland. Now, Maryland was able to win all of the redistricting lawsuits this year, or back in 2011 that was filed against it. But I can tell you that Judge Titus, in his concurring opinion, did point out something very interesting, and I want to read the language to you. It said, "It is clear that the plan adopted by the General Assembly of Maryland is by any reasonable standard a blatant political gerrymander." In particular, I want to point out that Congressional District 3 is particularly offensive for several different reasons. It probably defies most logic in terms of how it's drawn. It certainly divides communities of interest, and it egregiously goes into Montgomery County. So the district's actually based in Baltimore and in the Baltimore region, but because the party decided that they wanted to shore up the 3rd congressional district so that there was, no opportunity for fair competition there, they decided to grab Democratic votes in Montgomery County. They grabbed safe Democratic votes, and the reason why I say that is because they picked up minorities, specifically in Montgomery County, in order to make a Baltimore-based district a safe district. And on so many different levels, I find that offensive.
So I can take a look at.
Okay. You take a mic.
Well, thanks so much for allowing me to participate in this. The Tame the Gerrymander Coalition has done some outstanding work, I think, addressing, kind of highlighting the problem with gerrymandering in Maryland. And now I think part of the goal of this gathering is talk about what some of the solutions might be. So I guess we can start in. We're going to talk about a few different models for redistricting reform. One is going to be the independent commission model. California has kind of the most independent system in the country, but there are other variations on that, so we're going to take a look at those. We're going to talk about states like Florida, in which the legislature still draws the lines, but they are restricted in their ability to gerrymander by constitutional requirements. A bipartisan politician commission is also a possibility, and we're going to look at very quickly at New Jersey, how that works. And then finally, Iowa has a unique model in the United States in that a nonpartisan legislative research entity does the drawing of lines, so we'll look at that.
So you really have to make sure you get incentives right when you think about any enterprise, any organization, et cetera. And the Congress of the United States right now has a very bad incentive system. And that's because of the gerrymandering process that's gone on in the redistricting. And in fact, about 80 to 85% of the districts in the United States are considered safe districts, which means there is no real challenge during a general election. So some estimates as much as 85%. This year is probably closer to 80%. Whether it's 80 or 85%, those individuals have an incentive. They may not do it, but if they follow their incentives, and we have to assume a vast majority of people will act to some degree on their incentives, their incentive is to only talk to half of the country. And in fact, because of the number of people who vote in primaries, which is embarrassingly low, their incentive, quite frankly, is to speak to the more active members of that half of the country, if you will, which is why we have such a polarized Congress, which is why the 500 people in the Congress of the United States behave dramatically differently than all the other human beings in the world. Because human beings have incentives to move forward and get things done and work with other people, because that's how you make progress in life.
To Congressman Delany's point, I mean, if we did have, and I think we should adopt national standards, in particular for our congressional representatives, because everything else is driven by federal law. So the way, the fact that to a person, essentially we can't do it to a person, but essentially to a person, the district should be similar or the exact same size. I mean, that is not a state law. That's driven by the federal law. So I think coming up with some standards really would help to bring some sanity to us as a state when we're drawing these lines.
I want to, if I could, turn to some of the examples of where you've had success with changing the process. Whatever the merits of your proposal, and I'm actually in favor of all three of those things there, I think you'd probably concede that at the moment the likelihood of your bill passing in this Congress is probably slim to slim. And therefore, if we're not going to have federal reform, it means changing the process at the state level. Unfortunately, there, it's something like partisan unilateral disarmament. Yes, why would a blue General Assembly suddenly go behave a different way? Why would Texas decide that they're going to give up red seats by doing this? So you had an example, if I was counting right, 7 states that have done things, and you had one very large blue state, and you had one very large red state. So can you talk about how that change has occurred? And what can folks in Maryland do to bring about change here?
Well, some of the examples, will simply don't apply in Maryland, like Arizona, California, or ballot initiative states. But in other places, there was sufficient public pressure, like Washington State is one, in which it was the legislature that implemented a change. In Iowa, the legislature decided that they didn't want to be the line drawers. And, I think, one, there's public pressure because it's, there are ugly districts that demonstrate a desire to protect incumbents, to protect party advantage. And, and I'd actually ask the delegate to speak to this. I don't know that drawing lines is a particularly pleasant process. It seems to be a vitriolic, angry process that leaves people not very pleased with each other. So I think, but in the end, it's these gatherings to make sure that, a topic that is somewhat arcane to many in a state, to make sure that they are aware that this really cuts at our fundamental rights to fair representation.
So I think this issue is a perfect issue for a real big national movement. And maybe the best issue out there, right? There's a lot of things we all want to change in government, right? But a lot of them are really complicated, and a lot of them, quite frankly, are very ideological, and it's hard to get broad-based momentum. This issue is really about the people versus the government, right? Full stop. It's about the entrenched interest versus the interest of the common good of the United States, more than any issue. And I think it's a pretty clean. To argue against some of this stuff is an utterly indefensible position. You cannot stand up in front of citizens and argue for not some reform here. You can't do it. You really can't do it, I think, and look halfway credible. So what the citizens have to do is push people. You really have to push people hard. And we have to figure out some way of mobilizing a movement here in Maryland and hopefully across the country. Because this is one where the people can really make a difference. Because unlike these other issues that, yeah, we should do tax reform. But let's face it, there's 400 items of tax and there's 300 items of deduction. It's easier said than done. A lot of things are easier said than done. People can make arguments on both sides. This is a really clean case and a clean cut. And we just need more people to focus on it, and we can make a difference on this one.